I should hold on. All right, thank you so much. Okay, so good morning, good afternoon, good evening from everywhere you're joining this dissertation defense today. I do appreciate everyone's presence. And I also would start by appreciating God Almighty, who gave me the opportunity to be able to attain this level in my education career. Most importantly, I thank the Lord Jesus for the salvation of my soul, which is the reason why I'm here today. And I also like to appreciate my committee, the 4 committee of great women who held my hands all throughout this dissertation research. I'd like to appreciate my professors as well and my colleagues, and also my husband and everyone that I've appreciated before starting earlier on. As you have all heard and seen, the title of my dissertation is Equitable and Inclusive Values Engagement in Evaluation Capacity Building, a mixed method cross-examination of Nigeria and the United States of America. So quickly, the agenda, the introduction encompasses the positionality, the background, some notable concepts, problem statement, study purpose, and research questions. So the second aspect is about the literature review, which is the theoretical underpinning and conceptual framework that I use for the study. The methodology encompasses the research design, data collection analysis, research quality assurance. The fourth aspect is the findings, where I will talk through the quantitative, qualitative, and integrative analysis findings from this study. And the conclusion encompasses the application of findings, the research strengths and limitation, recommendation for future research, and the conclusion. So a little bit about myself. As you all know, my name is Omodolapo Ojo. In conducting this research, how exactly is my intersecting identity as an African-American woman, a Nigerian born, a wife, a daughter, someone who is privileged to be in the higher education, and a Christian? These intersecting identities impact my worldviews and may influence my research in nuanced ways. What relevant experience have I got in working in this research focus? Before I came to the United States of America, I've worked several years in Ondo State Ministry of Health, Ondo State Primary Healthcare Development Agency, specifically at the Nigerian State Health Investment Project, where I had the opportunity to be a trainee and a facilitator of different monitoring and evaluation programs that were specifically made for public servants and front-end like workers. In these years, I had the opportunity to see the experiences of diverse stakeholders in monitoring and evaluation program. And when I transitioned into the US for my graduate studies for the past 6 years, I've been a graduate research assistant working on several evaluation projects under STEM Program Evaluation Lab, Office of Assessment, Evaluation and Research Services, and other research and evaluation engagement, even in the Department of Information, Library, and Research Sciences. In all of these years, and coming to the US, I've had a broader perspective of what evaluation capacity building looks like. And the differences in Nigeria and the US has actually activated my interest in this research topic. The disparities I see in stakeholders' involvement in monitoring evaluation in Nigeria and the US really motivated my interest to see what exactly is the differences and what exactly can be done considering Nigeria where the culture of evaluation is still relatively weak, despite multiple monitoring and evaluation program or evaluation capacity building that is done in Nigeria compared to the US, where there are still some profound impacts of evaluation. So, a little bit about the background of the study. For the past 30 years, the awareness about the critical importance of evaluation capacity building in enhancing effective policy making, decision making, and transformative programming that will advance sustainable development goals has increased investment into evaluation capacity projects. And this awareness has made several donor communities in global north, specifically the United States of America, to shape a lot of their developmental initiatives towards developing countries to focus on evaluation capacity building. As you see in this graph that I displayed before you, Nigeria constitutes a country in Africa that is receiving a lot of developmental assistance from the US. Specifically between 2014 and 2016, Nigeria was expected to receive from the US between 2,000 to 4,000 US million dollars. And a substantial amount of this development assistance is expected to go to evaluation capacity building. Then you ask yourself, where exactly is the difference is? Because currently in Nigeria, the transformative potential of evaluation capacity building hasn't been realized. And the foundations of the Evidence-Based Policy Act of 2018 stipulated that every recipient of federal fund from the US, whether local or international, do evaluation as part of mandatory activity for learning and evaluation purposes, meaning that the US impacts evaluation capacity building in Nigeria and in other developmental countries, in other countries of the world. Yet, what exactly is this looking like, especially in Nigeria? Now, notable terms that I'll be using as I proceed: evaluation capacity building. Going forward, I'm going to just abbreviate it as ECB. But I would like you to understand that it is intentional work to continuously create sustain overall organizational processes that makes evaluation, quality evaluation, and its uses routine. Equitable stakeholder engagement is an inclusive and fair participation of diverse stakeholders. Transformative potential here means positive and sustainable change in various aspects of development. So, what exactly is the problem that my research centers on? First, it centers on the lack of equitable and inclusive representation of stakeholder values, oftentimes with funders' values taking precedence. This undermines the potential and sustainability of evaluation capacity building in Nigeria. Also, Africa and Nigeria faced limitation, particularly in engaging government and other stakeholders, who sometimes think evaluation is not beneficial to their needs. Finally, empirical studies that actually explore how ECB supported by US enhance inclusive and equitable key stakeholders engagement is relatively scarce. In that wise, then the purpose of my study is actually to respond to the pressing need for empirical studies that explicitly focus on equity and inclusion stakeholder values engagement in ECB, to offer insights into the impact of global donors like the US on ECB initiatives executed in developing countries like Nigeria. And finally, my research offers insight into effective approaches to actually engaging diverse stakeholders in this program, particularly in Nigeria. My research question is actually in three phases. The first one is a cross-examination between Nigeria and the US in terms of the design and implementation of ECB, the framework and strategies used in implementing ECB, the similarities and differences in equity and inclusivity in ECB. The second aspect of my question is actually focused on looking at the equitable and inclusive diverse stakeholders' values engagement in Nigeria, also looking at the roles and influences of these funders, specifically from the US. Then, what are promising approaches that could help in order to build evaluation capacity building in Nigeria to meet the needs of the people? In order to get a very grounded understanding of this topic, I decided to go into literature to look into frameworks that could help me, especially focused on ECB, but couldn't find any. However, I looked into literatures that try to understand ECB using systems theory. However, the limitation of systems theory was that it could be very, very focused on the complexity of the ECB setting without necessarily paying attention to the cultural intricacies within ECB context. Hence, giving me the opportunity to have systems theory and culturally responsive evaluation coming together to provide a transformative framework to enhance in-depth understanding into equity and inclusion in evaluation capacity building. Because this is a transformative framework that prioritizes cultural responsiveness, community-based knowledge, and challenge existing power dynamics while delivering ECB within complex settings. Hence, even after getting these two frameworks, it still needed that I needed to still break down the framework such that it's able to give me a very good understanding of this topic. And in doing this, I came up with this framework. So this is an original contribution of my research to evaluation, which is going to be made available for other people to use in the field. I'm just going to give a very quick summary of what this framework is all about. But going from here, this framework is actually going to inform every other aspect of this presentation. So for instance, the centrality focused, it actually highlights the hierarchical and diverse levels interconnected within a broader capacity building that facilitates holistic and adaptive approach. Now, if you look at the holistic context, it elicits developing comprehensive mindset for stakeholders' engagements in evaluation capacity building. When you look at the strength-based design, it asserts the fact that there are limited resources and imbalanced relationships in all design, regardless of the provisions that are being made. Hence, there's a need to leverage opportunity, cultural strengths, and be selective in making decisions. The multifaceted perspective actually talks about integrating substantial and methodological elements that are rooted in multidisciplinary knowledge base in order to promote multicultural perspectives. The goal setting and diverse outcome dimension of this framework recognizes that various approaches may indeed lead to diverse outcome. However, there's a need to choose one optimal path that is available or that is affordable within the limited resources and all stakeholders agree to. The information processing and communication dimension actually highlight the role of communication in decision making. It talks about diverse ways of communicating using several or multiple approaches. The operational mechanism is actually focusing on the framework and strategies and other internal operation that takes place in evaluation capacity building context. The variability perspectives looks into the outcome, the challenges around ECB. And finally, what are the roles of ECB practitioners? Here, it's in two phases. They ensure systemic efficiency, and at the same time, they also ensure social justice in evaluation capacity building initiatives. As I rightly said, this is going to be informing every other aspect of this study as I proceed. So this study actually deployed a convergent mixed method research design, meaning that both quantitative and qualitative strands occurred concurrently between between September 4 to November 30th, 2024, about 3 months, I engaged in data collection, both survey and interview going on simultaneously. And in the quadric survey, 125 people responded to the survey. And after data cleaning, just 83 were useful for the analysis. However, out of the 125 people who decided to participate in this study, 16 decided to not just participate in the survey, but also engage in an average of 58 minutes interview with me on this study. Independent analysis of the qualitative strand took place using descriptive analysis, while the qualitative analysis also took place using both inductive and deductive approach. The inductive approach followed the thematic analysis, while the deductive approach followed those 9 dimensions I have earlier shown on the CRE-ST framework. At the end of the day, I brought these 2 results together in order to do integrative data analysis, to have an holistic understanding of what the research focus is. And interpretation of the findings followed thereafter. Now, among my participants, not the all 83 actually answered this, but this is actually a rough description of who they are. So in Nigeria, more men responded, while in the US, more of women responded to this survey. Now, in Nigeria, of course, many of them, all of them, were from African American or African origin background, while in the US, the majority were white. So in the US, the highest number of people, most people had doctorate degree, compared to Nigeria, where most participants had master's degree. However, across both countries, they were ranging between the ages of 36 and 45, who were the most in this study. In the interview as well, the same narrative extended. There were more men in Nigeria, more women in the US. However, just one person had that experience of both Nigeria and the US. So for those in Nigeria, they had a minimum decade of ECB experience in several sectors. In the US, their experiences range between months and several decades. However, one thing that I noticed in the US was that they were so particular about their topics, like they focus on equity, cultural humility, data analysis, project management, mixed methods, qualitative research. So right now, I'll just go to the research quality assurance. Of course, I didn't engage in data collection until I got the IRB approval. I ensured informed consent. I de-identified the data to ensure the privacy of my participants. And while I was analyzing, I ensured continuous reflection to track emergent themes, and also how my personal bias were kind of shaping during the course of the research. I memoed my insights, my analytical thoughts. I journaled my decision making. At the same time, I ensured member checking. I sent out the transcripts to my participants, and at least 2 of them even reached out to me and gave more information. I ensured triangulation of both the quantitative and qualitative data. Of course, this is a convergent mixed method research. I integrated peer debriefing, especially among the cohorts of those of us doing this dissertation together at this time. Finally, I'm going to be discussing now on my findings. So the first research question, how and in what ways is ECB designed and implemented in Nigeria and the United States? One major finding relevant to the holistic context was that ECB over the years evolved and varied in responsiveness to stakeholder needs and local community context. Here, the survey and interview findings converged in that in the US, more and most participants have witnessed or experienced ECB that aligned with their organization culture and address multiple stakeholder needs compared to their counterparts in Nigeria. Further exposition from interview revealed that ECB in Nigeria has actually transformed from mere data collection. And from the US, it has also transformed from an accountability and research focus to ensure that people gain that capacity to be able to use evaluation for learning improvement, and decision-making processes. Taye from Nigeria explained how focus of ECB in the 90s in Nigeria was mainly about data collection and data disaggregation. He said, at the beginning of institutionalizing M&E, or trying to expand and keep the pool of persons who can implement evaluation and support organization from within in the 90s, what we were doing at that time is to teach people the basics of evaluation, and then also teach them how to ensure that data is collected and disaggregated. Another key finding relevant to the centrality focus was that ECB was executed within leadership structures that prioritized evaluation differently, but within an environment that enhanced interconnection across multiple levels. Here, the integration of the survey and interview findings diverged. How? In the US, participants reported less frequent experiences with ECB that the public governance structures prioritize evaluation practices, compared to Nigeria, where half of the participants had more experience of ECB within ECB delivered in a public governance system that supports evaluation practices. But the interview findings gave a very different view of this. How? Several participants from Nigeria explained that ECB in Nigeria is characterized by leadership that lack commitment and support to the initiatives, whereas their counterpart from the US reported of leadership that showed substantial support, fund, and even active participation in ECB. Another key finding relevant to the strength-based design dimension of the pre-ST framework was that ECB were delivered in diverse time frames, emphasizes on pre-assessment informed approach, local expertise engagement, and equitable partnership. Here, the integration of the survey and interview findings also converged. However, participants in the US, in Nigeria, reported more frequent experiences of ECB, where individual pre-assessment and organization pre-assessment results shape the process. Time is also another factor that the participants in both countries varied in their experiences. For instance, for participants in Nigeria, looking at that graph, the longest ECB duration, about 45% of them had at most 2 to 3 years experiences of ECB, compared to their US counterparts that had about 80% saying that the least they had, or the least they had was 2 to 3 years of ECB duration that lasted the longest. And even looking at the shortest ECB duration, you still see that Nigerians have the shortest ECB frame. About 55% of the US says they have experienced ECB that did not last beyond 1 to 3 months, compared to Nigeria, where a whole lot of 72% reported of having ECB that did not last beyond 1 to 3 months. Now, in terms of collaboration between local stakeholders and international agencies or international partners, both participants in the two contests recorded of collaboration. However, the purpose of collaboration in Nigeria is for inclusion and localization purposes, whereas the purpose of collaboration in the US was actually to ensure mainstreaming of evaluation.
Did you print it?
Now,
no,
one of my participants reported saying,
I'll tell you what
working with non-evaluators. All right, thank you so much. So one of my participants, Alice interview from US, said, working with non-evaluators, that is definitely where most of my work centers, because we are working very collaboratively. It is much more of a partnership as opposed to a one-time. And so I think that the ability to better integrate this into their work also is higher because we already have an existing relationship. Another finding relevant to the viability perspective was that ECB operational landscape faced challenges militating against its sustainability in both US and Nigeria. In Nigeria and the US, insufficient time, inadequate funding, and limited responsiveness to local context, culture, and evolving needs was a problem. However, in the US, there were some misconception of people that have harmful history of research and evaluation efforts. Further exposition from the interview revealed that the challenges of ECB in the US could also be likened to that of an harsh political climate to equity-focused ECB. One of my interview, Mercy, said, I see these days political climate as a really big challenge to doing equity work in general. You know, there's certain faction of the government that want us to just completely stop using the word equity. Like, so we can't even say the word. It makes it a little hard to do the work. So I think that it's a big challenge that I see come up. And I see how it trickles down to local communities. For example, a lot of my work used to be in schools, and that is not happening anymore because of the politics of schools of North Carolina K-12. Now, on the finding, how do existing ECB framework and strategies implemented in Nigeria compare to those in the US? Here, findings relevant to the operational mechanism was that ECB initiative commonly operationalized with collaborative and utilization-focused framework. Here as well, the blended analysis of the survey and interview findings converged. However, in Nigeria, there were more of people reporting outcome mapping, participatory action research, developmental evaluation, and multidisciplinary model as common frameworks that they see used in Nigeria settings compared to the US, where they talked about logic models, theory of change, evaluative thinking, and culturally responsive framework as some of the most common frameworks they use. One of my interview from the US said, we had a logic model that we built with each district because we had like 5 or 6 school districts we were working with. Some of them had like an evaluation specialist on staff. Some of them were so understaffed, and the person who we were working with, like the family engagement coordinator, who had no evaluation or research background at all. So I'll proceed to the next finding that is relevant to the operational mechanism. ECB implemented in Nigeria was characterized by standalone strategy, unlike multiple strategies in both countries. So for Nigeria and the US, the survey findings and the interview findings as well converged. Training, hands-on project, fieldwork survey, need assessment, and focus group. And interview were commonly used in both settings. However, in Nigeria, there were more of people reporting coaching section and group work or seminars. While in the US, there were more people mentioning technical assistance, one-on-one consultation, and collaborative initiatives as common strategies used. So Taye reported from Nigeria how they were able to use technology in advancing ECB. We have a lot of online capacity building on the job training for staff across different programs. But I think that COVID provided us a lot more opportunity to reach more than we have been able to do, because now you don't need the cost to reach a lot of people. But the downside of online training is that we're not there. Now, what are some similarities and differences in terms of equity and inclusivity? ECB framework implemented rarely offered explicit guiding principles for incorporating equity. So in both settings, it was so clear that ECB strategies and frameworks were neutral. Addressing issues of equity, cultural responsiveness, and transformation actually lies at the purview of the ECB practitioners and stakeholders buy-in. Lily from the US said, they talk about the nuts and bolts of what comprises evaluation capacity in organization. They talk about some like generic approaches, but that equity, diversity, inclusiveness, cultural responsiveness is not layered on top of them. A lot of these frameworks, though, were published quite a while before evaluation field started to embrace the cultural rights movement. So, to what extent are these efforts equitable to diverse stakeholders' values and also inclusive in Nigeria? One of the notable findings was that ECB in Nigeria excluded specific stakeholder groups and lacked substantial progress towards equitable and inclusive stakeholders values engagement. In Nigeria, about 50% of the people reported sometimes or rare experience to ECB tailored towards active engagement or underrepresented. However, this about the same proportion reported ECB that engaged under-resourced people. Now, one of my participants said, I don't think that the power dynamic in Nigeria is fair based on our traditional code of conduct and our perception of disability. Will a king allow someone who is living with disability sit in the council to inform his rulership? He will likely not. There's always a woman in the cabinet of every tradition in Nigeria, so gender is taken. However, no matter how much you know, we are so patriarchal. Some councils are progressive. They will put a youth leader, but many will not because we believe that knowledge resides in age. The summary of the interview finding was that participants felt that women, youth, and people living with disabilities are still left out of ECB in Nigeria. Just like you see in the picture that I showed here, this was a man trying to cast his vote on the day of election. This is a disabled man. He crawled to do this. And this same man is not allowed to sit with decision maker to make decision about what will impact his life. That is what it looks like even in ECB in Nigeria. So what role and influence do funders have in ECB in Nigeria? External funders in Nigeria have collaboratively or independently funded these initiatives. However, their influences are still predominantly driving it with either flexible or prescriptive measures. Just like you see in that graph, 9, 5, 4 out of 18 reported either collaborative or single-handedly funding of ECB in Nigeria by US agencies. The interview also converged with the survey, just like I reported here, just like Dayo reported here from Nigeria, who had experience in both states. Said there are organizations that have standard ways of evaluating the project. And you as an evaluator, if you go to the field, it's either you abide by the rules or you break the rules. Basically, I would say most times it is the desire or the goal of the funder that drives evaluation work. And I think that is common in both contexts. So the same thing also goes with this, letting us to know that ECB in Nigeria has actually had funders who promoted mutual benefit and cultural responsiveness, although there are less partnership and transparency in their engagements. Just like you see in that graph, mutual benefits, cultural responsiveness, diverse perspective and approaches had a lot of participants, at least 70%, saying they had frequent experiences. However, when it comes to impartial rulemaking, fair partnership agreements, a substantial amount did not really experience this. One of my interviews also shared their experience, however, from a positive perspective of how they were able to engage with international funders in Nigeria. Finally, what are promising approaches and strategies for equitable and inclusive stakeholders' values engagement in Nigeria? From the views of my participant, as relevant to the viability perspective, it was that they suggested leveraging leadership of involvement in making evaluation a routine or mandatory practices. They suggested expanding access to local stakeholder participation in ECB. They wanted champions to be positioned in strategic places so that they can synthesize about the values of evaluation. They wanted ECB initiative to align with project goals. Professionalizing evaluation too was something they suggested within the public system. And also, they wanted more of trust and relationship building with indigenous community. One of my interview, Oni from Nigeria, said, we need evaluation champions that can begin to make noise about it every now and then for people to see the truth of the matter. In this part of the world, we are used to doing things for doing sake. Then after doing it, we're thinking about the next program to do. Finally, the integration of the qualitative and quantitative findings offers several recommendations to diverse group of stakeholders. For we evaluation capacity builder, we are asked, the study has actually provided the recommendation to move beyond mere acknowledgement to actively promote social justice in stakeholder values engagement. For foreign-based or external funders of ECB, there's a need to continuously learn or employ experts who can actually help them to achieve this goal. For we researchers, theorists, and developers of frameworks, there are still room to cover in terms of creating transformative frameworks and research that are contextually relevant to ECB approaches that will engage stakeholders in different contexts. For external ECB planners, there's a need to ensure gaining valuable contextual insight. However, there's a limit to what a foreigner can know, meaning there's a need to prioritize building trust and relationship, local expertise, ensure cultural strengths are incorporated all throughout the ECB. And finally, to leaders of organizations, government, and communities, most especially in Nigeria, there's a need to ensure substantial fund and support, and even enact policies that will help youths, women, and people living with disability to have meaningful engagement in ECB. The limitation of this study is actually centered around the methodology and also the scarcity of the literature that is focused on this part of the study. The strength of this study actually centers around the CRE-ST framework that I discussed earlier on. It really helped me to elicit nuanced areas that would have been left uncovered. The convergence mixed method design is also said to be a very powerful way of investigating a kind of research like this. The comparative analysis, also the extensive participation of participants in this study was great as well. Recommendation for research. My research is actually foundational, opening a lot of opportunities for people to still explore. This is still an under-researched area in ECB. And also the CRE-ST framework opens an avenue for researchers to test it out in different contexts and time points. The conclusion of the matter is this. This cross-examination research study actually leveraged on that framework that I shared with us to help me elicit inclusion and equity in ECB design and implementation in Nigeria. And as we have all seen, the perception of participants in US and Nigeria varied across contexts. These are some of the references I used. At this point, I would like to thank you for listening to me, and I welcome questions and feedback.
Thank you, Dolapo, for your presentation. So the questions will be for about 15 minutes. She's been very generous with the presentation, and we'll take questions from people who are online and then people in the room. 15 minutes.
May I ask a question?
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Lady Dolapo, for a very extensive research. In terms of transformative analysis that you just mentioned, are there guardrails by which those champions, or those who are implementing it, how they can continue to guarantee that transformative process is usually, it's painstaking, it takes a long time. How do we then guarantee the continuous implementation, evaluation, to check by that studies such as yours doesn't go just on the shelf without implementation, and continue to make sure the guardrails that can be built in to continue to facilitate, implement, and to cross-check that they are all right on track, and there are guardrails to guarantee that transformatively.
Okay, sir. If I get the question well, you're asking if there are guarantees that this kind of transformative research would not just be a research, and it will actually come into application. Am I right with that question, sir?
That is correct.
Okay, thank you so much. That's a very good question. So I think it's going to begin from myself as a researcher, and that has to start from the place of dissemination of these ideas. So the first is, from my perspective as a researcher, there's a work to do in terms of disseminating this idea, not just allowing it to stay on the shelf, just like you have mentioned, but I mean, kind of ensuring that I utilize every opportunity to share these research findings, because in the course of sharing it, then people get to learn more about it. And in learning more about it, there are chances of implementation and application of these findings. And that's from the perspective of dissemination. And just like I said, while I was talking about the recommendation, the implication of the findings, I said something that as evaluation capacity builders, we are actually at the forefront of ensuring that this work is done. And what do I mean by that? I've actually done a research right now. So it's a thing of making that decision, right? It's an individual decision to say, okay, I want to be transformative. I don't just want to be passive. I don't just want to acknowledge, because a lot of time we can acknowledge, yeah, equity and inclusion is a very good thing to do, but are we actually ready to step out? So I think that is a place of personal commitment, dedication, and also from my own perspective as a researcher, just to continue to disseminate. Application of it is actually left on people to actually do. I'm not sure if I really...
may I follow up with a follow-up question? That is,
okay, sir.
usually in situations like this, to get the maximum benefit of your research, there will be those who perhaps for wrong reasons are stakeholders that will not want the researchers such yours to see the light of day. Globally, nationally, there will always be those who will be against change. Change is one of the most difficult things.
Right.
How then do we convince some of these stakeholders that it is to their advantage and to their benefit overall, nationally and globally, to implement your suggestions as discovered in your research?
Thank you so much, sir. I think I will also still go back to some of the findings that I shared with us. So when it comes to implementing this kind of research, especially talking from the perspective of the funders, you can only continuously teach people, continuously exposing the information to them, because this has to do with a change of mindset, a mindset shift. And everything that has to do with mindset shift, transformation, takes continuous learning. So it doesn't just jump on people, or people would not just want to act like a reflex action. No. Anything that has to do with transformation is a mind shift. And when we're dealing with mind shift, we should be ready to engage in continuous learning. So I believe continuous education would help. All right. Michael Sesenogwa, Frederick, Mr. Thank you. Can you ask your question?
Thank you very much. And that was a wonderful presentation. Mine may not be an entire question. I want you to to comment. Inclusion and equity are hinged on rootedness. So wanted you to, as you're conducting the survey, the analysis, and so forth, is there any kind of indigenous evaluation methods, knowledge that came up, or what is your take on those? As in that thing that you could talk about in your recommendation and recommendations or discussions to future researchers around this. Yes, you interface with people who are doing evaluation in Nigeria or Africa in that case, vis-a-vis those in the US. How were they applying any indigenous evaluation techniques or approaches, or you didn't experience any of that? And how would that expound on the study and improve, or as a recommendation for future evaluation of people who do research in this field?
Thank you so much, Mr. Frederick Sesenogwa. I believe, if I understand your question well, the question was that for indigenous evaluation, like, how does it come into place in this? How will I talk about indigenous evaluation in terms of future researcher? right? Both in the US and in Nigeria. How does it come up? Did I interpret? Did I get the question well, please?
Yes, and how that influences equity and inclusion.
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Freddy Sesenogwa. That's a very good question. So in terms of indigenous evaluation approach, how does it come into place in here? Like I've said, I believe indigenous evaluation approach is like ensuring that you're contextually responsive in terms of the work that you do. So for future researchers, I realize that, in fact, even in the course of doing this evaluation, the instances where people talked about these indigenous evaluation approaches coming into place was that, yes, there are existence of indigenous evaluation approaches, but oftentimes what comes first to the people is what the funders would like to be done first. So in terms of the application of indigenous evaluation approaches in this context for future researchers, of course, there's a need to focus more on that aspect of things. But as a researcher, you can actually continue to make research, disseminate findings, but the application in the context of Nigeria or in other parts of Africa, or even in the US, lies at the discretion of whoever is doing the work. But as a researcher, of course, we can continue to front this idea. It came up in my research, like people talking about indigenous evaluation or people talking about ECB that engaged the indigenous community. So this is coming up as an evaluation, as an equity practices, right? But as a researcher, we can always talk about this, research about this, but the application of it is actually at the discretion of whoever is doing the work. I'm not sure if I answer your question or if I do answer your question with Mr. Michael Sesenogwa.
Yeah, that will do. Thank you very much.
All right, sir. Thank you. Donata?
Thank you, Dolapo, for a very great presentation. My question is, and I think you probably responded to it, but I will still ask anyways if there's anything you can add to it. So my question is, in relation to your study, earlier this year, the government of the US issued a statement concerning the ban of the teaching of the knowledge of equity, diversity and inclusion and social justice related courses in schools and in university level. My question is, what was your initial reaction in response to this, particularly in relation to your topic, but also seeing that some of your research findings are the actual reality of what is happening in the developed nations, such as the US, who are usually the major funders of this evaluation in African or developing countries. In relation to that, how do you see these changes impacting the learning of equity and inclusion for evaluation for capacity building? And how is it going to impact the implementation of these kinds of evaluation in developing countries in the near future, given that we are receiving funding from maybe the US, say, for example? Those are my questions.
Thank you so much, Donata. That's a very great and timely question. So, of course, hearing about the ban of equity, diversity and inclusion and social justice within the education system, as it is right now in the US, wasn't something that I was happy about happening. But the reality is, equity is something that has been, either we acknowledge the existence or we do not acknowledge the existence. So meaning that even when the political system is not acknowledging it, doesn't mean it's not existing. And when something is existing, as researchers, there's still need for us to actually explore such things. Of course, this is going to impact the implementation of a program like this, but there's still a way to go about it, right? So there was a time that one of my researchers talked, during the course of this presentation, I also shared some of the excerpts of what she said, saying that some of the jobs she did in the North Carolina schools were no more because of the equity barrier in the education system. So does that mean equity will no longer happen in the education system? No. There's still a way to go about this. Some of the findings that I came up with in this research was in the place of continuous education. This is a mindset shift, right? For a leader, for a political system that is not allowing equity to be explicitly talked about or used in the society, doesn't mean researchers should then fold their hands. Are women not being excluded from evaluation capacity building in Nigeria? Look at the group of people that are not really included in this process. And yet, a lot of billions of dollars are going into this. So this work will definitely continue. Of course, we're going to face resistance, but it shouldn't be that because of the resistance, then we take a lead that, oh, we're not going to do it. When the people are still having this problem in the system, yes, there are resistance, but as researchers, there's still a need to proceed, whichever way we find it possible.
Thank you, Dolapo.
Thank you. We do have time just for one more question.
Okay, so I think someone is raising up the hands. But, okay, sir. Okay, sir. Pastor Andrew Famogun.
All right. Let me just start by saying congratulations, Omodolapo. I listened intensely, even though my background is financial accounting, enterprise resource planning, and so on and so forth. But your approach of using convergent mixed methods in your research designs, I see it as something that allows you the flexibility to work with both quantitative and qualitative data simultaneously. So as a comment, I just want to say that that you have done an excellent job with this. Your methodology surely has provided you with the deeper insights, particularly in merging statistical trends with participants' perspective. Based on the way you've analyzed and the way you've responded to the questions. I've been tremendously, well, if I use the word blessed, or I've learned one or two things.
Thank you, sir.
That is my comment. Thanks.
Thank you so much, sir. I do appreciate you, sir. Thank you. All right. So.
Yeah, we didn't have anyone, we didn't have time for questions from the room. Does anyone have a burning question for Dolapo?
I would say that was a great presentation. Thank you. The question I wanted to ask has been asked by the online team, and that has been good. So thank you so much.
All right. So thank you again for your questions. So what is going to happen now is that Dolapo will go to meet with the committee members for about 20 minutes or so. Please stay around and wait for the results of her defense. So the committee members, please join the breakout room, and we will be back shortly.
Okay.
Dr. Kinney, is someone going to put us in a room?
I think Dr. Reed is doing that.
Okay, all right, maybe once she gets downstairs.
All right.
Congratulations to the locals. We have the newest doctor in town.
Congratulations!
Thank you, please. Okay, so we are going to ask the committee members who are online to give a few remarks. Dr. Newcomer, I know you have to jump off.
Congratulations. It was my pleasure to get to know you and to help you see you on this important journey. You did a wonderful job, particularly, oh my gosh, the presentation today was amazing. And I'm glad that so many of your friends and colleagues were able to see it. You did a fabulous job.
Thank you.
The newest doctor in town.
Dr. Ojo, I just want to say I'm incredibly proud of you. I'll say the same things I said in the room. I thought you just did a wonderful job in your document. For those who weren't privy to reading her full document, she did way more than even was asked of her from her committee. And so just done a really excellent job. We're so proud of her. She's come such a long way, and really we're looking forward to seeing what's next.
Dr. Dolapo, it's been a very long journey. The two of us, we worked together over what, 6 years?
6 years.
6 years, and super proud of you today.
Thank you so
Your
much.
dissertation was exemplary in terms of the quality of work that you've always done working with me. And I'm so thankful to just send you off on your next chapter.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations, Dolapo.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I'm so grateful.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so grateful. Okay, thank you very much, everyone, for coming. We will take a few pictures here, and if anyone wants to stay around and give more encouragement to Dolapo, you're welcome.
Aw.
Take it.
Stay on real quick so we can. See if we can get a picture with Dr. Newcomer and Dr.
Can I have the slide on there?
Where they go? Dolapo, let's get a picture with Dr. Newcomer and Dr. Boyce on.
Yeah.
Where's the show?
This one?
There are two faces. If you can get Dr. Boyce and Dr. Newcomer. Dr. Newcomer, can you come back to the breakout room?
How?
Hang on. Good question. You should be able to see if you click on more and go down, and you should see breakout room.
Okay, got it.
Option to join.